November 29th, 1943. 24,000 feet over Bremen. A B-17 explodes apart, its tail ripped free in a howl of metal. Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran is inside that falling wreckage, both arms bleeding, parachute shredded, Germany spinning below. 4 miles of nothing, 90 seconds to die. And as the frozen ground rushes up, Moran does the unthinkable. From a severed tail, mid-freefall, he keeps firing back at the enemy with rage, grit, and impossible defiance. Before we continue, hit that like button right now. Every single like tells YouTube to share this story with more people who need to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we bring you forgotten stories of real heroism every day. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from: United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, wherever you are. You're part of keeping these memories alive. The German fighters circled closer, watching the wreckage tumble through the sky. They had seen bombers go down before, watched men bail out or ride burning aircraft to their deaths. But they had never seen this. A man in a falling coffin, spinning end over end through thin air, firing back at them with everything he had. Tracers arced wildly across the gray November sky. One Messerschmitt took hits across its fuselage and dove away trailing smoke. In that moment, the German pilots understood something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They weren't fighting soldiers anymore. They were fighting ghosts who refused to die. Eugene Moran had enlisted the day he turned 18. A farm boy from Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, he had spent his childhood watching aircraft pass overhead and dreaming of flight. The Army Air Forces needed gunners in 1942. Young men with quick reflexes and steady nerves. Boys who knew how to shoot. Moran volunteered for the most dangerous position on a B-17. The tail gunner sat alone at the very back of the bomber, separated from the rest of the crew by 40 feet of fuselage. His only company was a pair of .50 caliber machine guns and the German fighters trying to kill him. The training taught him to track fast-moving targets while compensating for wind, altitude, and the speed of his own aircraft. He learned to fire in short bursts to prevent his barrels from overheating. He memorized the silhouettes of enemy fighters at 2,000 yards. But no amount of training could prepare anyone for the reality of combat over Germany. The cold at 24,000 feet dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes within minutes of exposure. The thin air made every movement exhausting, every breath a conscious effort through an oxygen mask that frosted with ice crystals. And the German fighters came in waves, firing 20-millimeter cannons that could tear through aluminum like paper. By November 1943, the 8th Air Force was hemorrhaging bombers at a catastrophic rate. The mission to Schweinfurt 2 months earlier had cost 60 flying fortresses in a single day. 600 men killed or captured in one afternoon. Bomber crews called deep missions into Germany milk runs to hell. The mathematics were brutal and simple. A crew had to complete 25 missions to go home. Statistical analysis showed the average crew lasted 15. Some groups were losing half their aircraft every month. November 29, 1943, was Moran's first combat mission. Ricky Tikki Tavi, his B-17, had taken off from Snetterton Heath in England that morning as part of the 96th Bomb Group. The target was Bremen, an industrial city on the Weser River. Shipyards, aircraft factories, submarine pens. One of the most heavily defended cities in Germany. The bomber formations crossed the North Sea in tight defensive boxes, each B-17 positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. The theory was elegant. Pack the bombers close together so their combined firepower could drive off enemy fighters. The reality was that a direct hit on one aircraft often damaged those flying beside it. Shrapnel from exploding bombers killed crews in neighboring planes. Bremen's anti-aircraft defenses opened fire as the formations approached. Black bursts of flak filled the sky like deadly flowers blooming at precise altitudes. The bombers could not maneuver during the bomb run. They had to fly straight and level, perfect targets for the gunners below. Moran watched a B-17 in the formation ahead take a direct hit. It folded in half like paper and dropped from the sky, trailing smoke and debris. Men tumbled out without parachutes. Others never made it out at all. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi released its bombs over the target. 4,000 pounds of high explosives tumbling toward the factories below. Mission accomplished. Now they just had to survive the flight home. The bomber formation began its turn toward England. 200 miles of hostile airspace between them and safety. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi's No. 2 engine took a direct hit from flak. The propeller windmilled uselessly, creating drag that pulled the aircraft out of formation. A damaged bomber falling behind was a death sentence. German fighter pilots watched for stragglers the way wolves watched for injured deer. A lone B-17, without the protection of massed defensive fire, was easy prey. Moran saw them coming through the small window at his tail position. A dozen Messerschmitts climbing from below. Another group of Focke-Wulfs diving from above. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi was about to fight alone against overwhelming odds. The first Messerschmitt came in from the 6 o'clock low position, directly behind and beneath the bomber. Moran pressed his shoulders against the steel chest plate behind him and squeezed the triggers. His twin .50 calibers roared to life, the sound deafening in the cramped compartment. Tracer rounds streaked toward the fighter. The German pilot broke off his attack and rolled away, but there were more, many more. The Focke-Wulfs attacked in pairs. One would draw the gunner's attention, while the other lined up a killing shot. Moran swung his guns from target to target. Spent brass casings piled up around his knees. The smell of cordite filled his oxygen mask. The temperature was 43 degrees below zero, but the machine guns grew hot from continuous firing, while his fingers went numb inside his gloves. The German pilots were professionals. Luftwaffe veterans who had been fighting since 1939, who had learned their trade over Poland and France and England. They knew exactly how to kill a B-17, target the engines first, cripple the bomber's ability to keep up with its formation, then work on the gunners, eliminate the defensive fire position by position. Finally, pour cannon rounds into the fuselage until something vital broke. Moran heard the impacts before he felt them. 20-millimeter cannon shells punching through aluminum, the sound of tearing metal echoing through the airframe. Somewhere forward, one of the waist gunners stopped firing, then the other. The intercom filled with static and fragments of voices. He could not tell who was speaking or what they were saying. A Focke-Wulf came in from the 4 o'clock position. Moran swung his guns and pressed the triggers. The fighter's wing disintegrated under the stream of 50 caliber rounds. It spiraled downward, trailing black smoke. His first confirmed kill. There was no time to celebrate. cannon rounds ripped through the tail section around him. Moran felt something slam into his left forearm, then his right. Both arms had been hit. Blood soaked through his flight suit sleeves. The pain was immediate and intense, but his hands still worked. He could still grip the triggers. More impacts. The vertical stabilizer above him took multiple hits. Control cables snapped and whipped through the air like steel snakes. The tail section began vibrating violently. Something was very wrong with the aircraft. Moran glanced down at his parachute, the silk canopy packed into a canvas container strapped to his chest. Every airman's only chance of survival if the bomber went down. He saw holes in the fabric, multiple holes. Cannon rounds had shredded it. His parachute was useless. If he had to bail out, he would fall 4 miles to his death. The attack continued. German fighters made pass after pass. Moran counted at least 15 of them circling the crippled bomber. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi was bleeding altitude and speed, its remaining engines straining to keep the aircraft airborne. Forward in the nose section, Navigator Jesse Orson was still alive, wounded but conscious. Everyone else was dead. The pilot and co-pilot slumped at the controls. The flight engineer dead in his turret. The radio operator dead. The ball turret gunner dead. The waist gunners dead. Of the 10 men who had taken off from England that morning, only 2 were still breathing. Orson in the nose, Moran in the tail. 40 feet of shattered fuselage between them. Another cannon round struck the bomber. This one hit something critical. Moran felt the aircraft lurch. Then a grinding sound echoed through the airframe. The vibration intensified until his teeth rattled. Then came a sound he would never forget. The shriek of tearing aluminum. The scream of structural failure. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi was breaking apart. The fuselage split just forward of the tail section. Moran watched the front of the aircraft separate and fall away. The wings, the engines, the cockpit, the bodies of his crewmates, all of it tumbling toward the German countryside 4 miles below. He was alone now, trapped in a severed tail section. Wounded in both arms, his parachute destroyed. 24,000 feet above enemy territory. Falling. The laws of physics offered no mercy. Terminal velocity for a human body is approximately 120 miles per hour. The tail section of a B-17 weighed several thousand pounds. It would fall faster, much faster. Eugene Moran had perhaps 90 seconds to live. The severed tail section tumbled through the sky, spinning end over end. The rotation threw Moran against the walls of his compartment. His wounded arms screamed with pain. Blood sprayed across the interior. The wind howled through the torn fuselage, where the rest of the aircraft had been. He should have been paralyzed with fear. He should have curled into a ball and waited for death. Instead, he did something that defied all logic. He kept fighting. The German fighters were still circling. They saw the tail section falling and moved in for a closer look. Perhaps they wanted to confirm the kill. Perhaps they were curious. Whatever their reason, they made a fatal mistake. They flew within range of a wounded tail gunner who refused to die. Moran grabbed his machine guns. The spinning tail section made aiming nearly impossible. The G-forces pressed him against his seat, then threw him toward the ceiling. His arms were bleeding. His parachute was destroyed. He was falling 4 miles to certain death, and he was still shooting. Tracers arced wildly through the sky as the tail section rotated. The German pilots scattered. They had never seen anything like this. One Messerschmitt took hits across its fuselage. The pilot broke off and dove toward the ground, trailing smoke. The ground was growing larger through the gaps in the torn metal. Fields, forests, roads, a patchwork of German farmland rushing up to meet him. The tail section's aerodynamics saved his life. The vertical stabilizer and horizontal stabilizers acted like crude wings. They caught the air and created drag. Instead of plummeting straight down, the wreckage began to glide. The spinning slowed. The descent became almost controlled. Almost. Moran estimated he was falling at approximately 100 feet per second. Fast enough to kill him on impact, but slower than free fall. The stabilizers were buying him time. Seconds, perhaps a minute. Time he used to keep firing at any German fighter that came close. The ground was 5,000 feet below, then 3,000, then 1,000. Moran braced himself against the steel chest plate. He wrapped his wounded arms around the ammunition boxes. There was nothing else to hold on to. The tail section struck the top of a pine tree at approximately 100 miles per hour. The impact snapped branches as thick as a man's arm. The vertical stabilizer caught on a trunk and tore away. The wreckage cartwheeled through the forest canopy, shedding pieces of aluminum with each impact. Moran's head slammed into the steel framework above him. His vision exploded into white light. He felt his ribs crack. Both arms bent at angles they were never designed to bend. The tail section hit another tree, spun sideways, and crashed into the frozen ground. Then silence. Eugene Moran was alive, barely. He lay in the wreckage, unable to move. Both forearms were broken in multiple places, compound fractures with bone protruding through skin. His ribs were shattered. Every breath brought stabbing pain. Blood poured from a wound on his head, where a piece of his skull had been torn away. His brain was partially exposed to the freezing air. The crash site was in a forest near the German town of Syke, 15 miles south of Bremen, enemy territory. He was surrounded by people who had just watched American bombs destroy their factories and kill their neighbors. Hypothermia would kill him within hours if his wounds did not kill him first. German soldiers emerged from the trees with rifles raised. They surrounded the wreckage and stared at the American lying in the snow. One of them shouted orders. Another ran back toward the road to summon an officer. Moran could not resist. He could barely breathe. The soldiers searched him roughly, ignoring his screams as they moved his shattered arms. They found his dog tags, his rank insignia, his ruined parachute. They left him lying on the frozen ground while they examined the tail section. An officer arrived within the hour. He looked at Moran's wounds and shook his head. The American was clearly dying, but orders were orders. Downed airmen were to be captured and interrogated if possible. They loaded Moran onto a wooden cart. No stretcher, no blankets, no medical attention. The cart bounced along frozen roads for what felt like hours. Every jolt sent fresh agony through his broken ribs and fractured arms. The wound on his skull had stopped bleeding only because the cold had frozen the blood into a dark crust. The cart delivered him to a German military facility. His vision blurred. Consciousness came and went in waves. He remembered being carried inside. He remembered lying on a concrete floor. He remembered German voices discussing him as if he were already a corpse. No doctor came, no medic. No one offered water or bandages or morphine. The Germans had limited medical supplies, and they were not about to waste them on an enemy airman who would probably die anyway. Moran lay on that concrete floor for 2 days. His wounds became infected. The exposed brain tissue began to swell. His broken arms turned purple and black. Gangrene was setting in. Without surgery, he would lose both limbs. Without antibiotics, the infection would spread to his blood. Without intervention, he had perhaps 48 hours to live. On the 3rd day, he was transported to a prisoner of war hospital, a converted building where wounded Allied airmen were held until they recovered enough to be sent to permanent camps. The hospital was understaffed and undersupplied. German military doctors performed triage on incoming prisoners. Those with survivable wounds received treatment. Those deemed beyond saving were left to die. Moran's injuries placed him firmly in the 2nd category, but the hospital held a secret. Among the prisoners were 2 Serbian doctors, military physicians captured on the Eastern Front, forced to treat wounded POWs with almost no equipment or anesthesia. They operated so German doctors could focus elsewhere. When they examined Eugene Moran, they chose to act, not by order, not with proper tools, simply because he was wounded and they were physicians. The surgery lasted 7 hours. Using crude field instruments and weak local anesthetics, they set shattered bones with wire and pins. They cleaned infected tissue, removed skull fragments, and covered exposed brain as best they could. A metal plate was fixed to Moran's head. His arms were splinted with wooden boards and bandaged with torn sheets. When it ended, they told him the truth. The next 72 hours would decide everything. The fever struck the first night. His temperature reached 104 degrees. Chills racked his body as infection spread. The second night brought delirium. He cried for his mother and relived the destruction of his bomber, Rikki Tikki Tavi. On the 3rd morning the fever broke. Moran opened his eyes. He had survived. 6 weeks later he could walk. His skull plate caused constant pain. His arms remained bound, but he was alive. The Germans transferred him to Stalag Luft 4 in Pomerania, a camp of barbed wire guard towers. Starvation rations and freezing winters. Over months he was moved between camps as Germany collapsed. The worst transfer came in late 1944, when hundreds of prisoners were packed into the unventilated hold of an aging Baltic freighter. Men died during the 4-day crossing. The living stood among the dead. In February 1945, Soviet forces approached. The Germans ordered evacuation on foot. Thus began the Black March, 86 days of snow, hunger, disease, and execution for those who fell behind. An estimated 1,500 Allied airmen died. Moran kept walking, refusing to die on frozen roads. On April 26th, American troops liberated the column near the Elbe. Moran weighed 93 pounds. He had fallen 4 miles without a parachute and survived captivity, surgery, camps, and march. Only 3 Allied airmen survived such falls in the war. Moran was one. He returned to Wisconsin, married, raised 9 children, and stayed silent for decades. In 2007, he received Wisconsin's first Veteran Lifetime Achievement Award. Eugene Moran died in 2014, aged 89, remembered for life. His quiet endurance became legend locally, symbolizing survival, sacrifice, humility, and resilience beyond imagination for generations afterward.